Hello, everybody. Rest in peace to Kyle Klumsky, who apparently was the name of the actor who very, tragically was sort of, I don't know how else to say it. I don't want to be too graphic for the YouTube guidelines, but, apparently he had some very minor credits. He was in Trintellix commercial, which is a medication for psychiatric disorders. He was in some stock photos, I believe. So rest in peace, Kyle. We hardly knew you, right? Nobody knew you very well because you weren't very successful. But that's okay, because ultimately that's the thing about success. We're all going to die anyway. So what difference does it make if you're a mediocre failure like Kyle or a very successful, prolific entertainment mogul like Dan Henschel? It doesn't. At the end of the day, we're all just going to be dust all the same. So anyway, that was a real whopper of a night. In the last video. So I went home and I rested up the next day, and the following night my burner phone rang again. So I answered it and I said, "Hi, this is Dan Henschel. Who is this?" And Officer Frank said, "You don't have to answer. Please stop answering with your full name, okay? Because the only person who will ever call you on this phone is me. Hopefully the only person who ever answers is you. If anyone else calls or answers, that is a problemo. So remember, anonymity is the most important thing about this operation." I was like, yeah, you keep saying that, but whatever. So then I said, "I have a little bit of a request, Officer Frank. It really stresses me out getting random phone calls and not knowing when somebody's going to try to call me on the phone, So I think it would really help me if we, instead could text. And I think it would really help me if you have something that you want to talk about, just tell me right away. Don't text me or call me and say, hey, we need to talk, tomorrow at 9 or whatever, because then that's just going to ruin the entire night for me. I have a lot of anxiety. So just come right out and say it, whatever it is." So he said, "All right, I need you to meet me at 8, and hung up. So I was like, Officer Frank, Mr. Funny Boy, So I went over to his office. And he said, "So Dan, the concert." And I said, "Pretty good, right? I mean, for somebody who's has no experience with music or concerts, that wasn't bad, right?" And he said, "It was horrible. It was an embarrassment to music itself as a concept. It was an embarrassment to the entire police force. It was an embarrassment to improv comedy." And I was like, well, let me stop you right there. They've already embarrassed themselves enough to last a lifetime. So, and he continued and said, "It was an embarrassment to the entire human race." And I said, "That's a little excessive. I think that at the very least it was, I don't know. I mean, I think at the very least it was certainly something that, honestly, I think it was more interesting than Taylor Swift's actual work, because at least my stuff was sort of experimental. It was a little different than what she normally does." And he said, "Okay, I'll be honest with you. Just on the basis of that concert, I would have fired you and then executed you by firing squad." And I said, "I don't think you're allowed to do that in California." And he said, "We managed to make it work." So I was like, oh, okay. And he said, "But you're very lucky because your intel that you got from Big Lebowski was very good." And I said, "Oh, thanks. I'm a pretty charismatic guy." And he said, "Yeah, so that was good stuff. So what we want you to do now is, instead of, Big Red was plan A, but we actually like this plan a lot better. Because Big Lebowski is much dumber than Big Red is. Big Lebowski is also Big Red's right-hand man, and he also seems to have some dissatisfaction with Big Red, like you said. So the goal here is going to be to see if you can get to know Big Lebowski and then eventually turn him so that he can give us Big Red on a silver platter, basically. So I was like, great. You know, and I'll admit, Big Lebowski, I mean, he's sort of, I was annoyed with him at first when I first went into emergency vet because I was, you know, it was a high stress situation. So I was annoyed with him at the beginning. But then, you know, it was sort of like, I started to see him in a different light the night before, and he was a cool guy, you know. He seemed like a nice guy. I don't know. So I was like, okay, I like him a lot more than Big Red, to be honest with you. So I said, okay, what's the next move then? And he said, we would like you to go back to the bar tonight, you know, and talk to Big Lebowski again. And sort of just keep solidifying your relationship with him, you know, and also see if you can keep an eye on the activity that goes on in the bar, because clearly, you know, Big Red conducts operations there, you know, and so we just want you to keep an eye on, like, if he's there, you know, who comes in and out of his office, you know, how long do they stay, just get a feel for what goes on in the place. You know, so I was like, okay. So I got in my Taylor Swift costume, and I went to the Big Red bar, emergency vet bar and grill. And my entourage minus, what was his name? Rick? The guy who passed away, sadly? Frank? No, that's the officer's name. Well, minus that guy, because he died. But honestly, he was a little fucking bitch. You know, I mean, he was. And I'll tell you something. The fact, you know, this isn't true even just in entertainment, but in all industries, you know, the biggest, most important thing that determines you getting work is if you are a kind, pleasant person to be around. That is number one. Number two is ability and skill. But number one is always, you know, soft skills. So can you be pleasant to talk to? Are you charismatic? Are you somebody who people are going to want to have around all day? Are you somebody that people can trust? Are you somebody who's going to be reliable? You know, can you be there on time? I'm not any of those things. So he's certainly not either. I'm sorry. He's not any of those things. I am all of those things. And I started, I mean, you know, based on that night, I was like, I wouldn't hire this guy. You know, he's an asshole. And, you know, I wish that he had lived for me to be able to give him that advice, because I think that might help him out a lot, you know, but his problems are over now. So I was Taylor Swift, and I went into the bar, with my entourage minus Ray, what's his name? John? Dave? I don't know. Fucking everybody's names. It's like everybody on Earth has like the same 10 names. You know, it's like, why do we even bother? Went into the bar as Taylor Swift. And my entourage, minus Dave. You know, I came in, I was like, ha! And the Big Lebowski was like, hey, Taylor, what are you doing here? You know? And I said, well, I just want to come see y'all again, because I had so much fun last night. And he was like, oh, that's so awesome to hear. I had a great time too. You know, I really enjoyed myself. And I was like, oh, that's so nice. So, how you been? What's going on tonight? He said, oh, nothing really. I'm waiting for my boss to get back because I have to go run an errand with him. So I was like, oh, really? What kind of errand are you running with him? And he said, well, I really shouldn't say too much because he's a very secretive guy, you know. And I was like, oh, you can tell me. I'm your friend. And he said, well, Big Red is in the mafia. And I was like, we are just kidding me around. You're just pulling my leg, aren't you? And he was like, no, Big Red is a mob boss. And I was like, oh my God, that's crazy. And he said, yeah. So tonight we're supposed to go do a drug deal with a rival mafia family in town. And I said, who is it? And Big Lebowski was like, honestly, I don't know. I've never met the guy. They're French, apparently. So I was like, oh, really? And I said, I love their fries. He was like, oh, yeah, French fries. They're pretty good. You want to have some? We have some on the menu. I was like, no, I'm trying to, watch my figure so that I can be a pop star. But thanks anyway. And he was like, no, come on, you look beautiful. And I was like, oh my gosh, you little dog. And he sort of giggled like, that was not cute. But what he did was, Taylor Swift. If Taylor Swift was me, she would have thought that was endearing. Because she likes, Eddie, cut that. So I said, well, what time's your boss gonna be here? And he said, any minute now. And I said, well, who's gonna watch the bar when you're gone? And he was like, well, I mean, probably nobody's gonna come in, so we're just gonna leave. So I was like, well, you know something? I could watch the bar for you if you want while you're gone. How long you gonna be gone? And he said, no, I don't want you to do that. I was like, come on, I got my whole entourage, and they have firearms, so they can watch the place for you for free. And I was like, all right, okay, you got yourself a deal, Mrs. Swift. So I said, great. So then we, kept talking a little bit, and I said, so what's your favorite color? Because I was just trying to think of icebreakers, And he was like, well, he's not Southern, I am Southern. Taylor Swift is Southern. He's like, well, my favorite color is probably, and then he sort of just stared like this into space, like that. His eyes sort of started to, and I was like, hello? And he said, And I said, Big Lebowski, hello? And he said, oh, sorry. What was the question? And I said, what's your favorite color? And he said, I don't know. And I was like, what do you mean? And he said, to be honest with you, I don't really know what you're talking about. And I said, you don't know what a color is? And he said, no, can you explain it? And I said, well, it's, and then I was like, how do I explain what a color is to somebody? And I said, well, you know how certain things are different than others? Visually? And he was like, yeah. Like some things are square and some things are circles. And I was like, no, I mean, yes, but no, you know how some things are like, and then I was just trying to look around the room to see if there were things that were different colors, which there were plenty of, So I pointed to the bar stool, and I was like, you see how this stool is brown? And he was like, what's that? And I was like, do you see how it has a sort of appearance? And he was like, yeah, it's looks like a foam, sort of round cushion with metal things on the bottom, and it sticks out. And I was like, no, I mean, yes, but the visual appearance of its surface has a quality. And he was like, yeah, it's leather. And I was like, no. And I was trying to think, how do I explain what a color is? And I said, well, you know when you look at the sky? And he said, yeah. And I said, you know how it's blue? And he said, I don't know. If what? And I said, when you look at the sky, what do you see? And he said, well, I just sort of see. And then his eyes went like this again, And I was like, Big Lebowski, what do you see when you look at the sky? And he said, I guess I don't really see anything. It's just kind of a void. And I was like, what? Wham! Sorry, I know people don't like jump scares, but wham! Big Red kicked in the back door, and came in with his cronies, the other bald cronies, and he was huffing and puffing, and he came in with those guys, and they both had big machine guns, and he said, all right, time to go. And he saw me sitting at the bar with Big Lebowski, and he was like, well, who are you there, pretty little lady? Or something like that, And I was like, my name's Taylor. And he came up close, and he started sniffing me, and he was like, you smell like vanilla. He's not Southern. You smell like vanilla. He sounds, I don't know, I don't have Big Red's voice yet. You smell like vanilla. That's what he said, menacingly. And I was like, oh, thank you. I like vanilla. And he was like, and I looked at Big Lebowski. He was getting real close. He was like sniffing me, like Joe Biden. And I looked at Big Lebowski, and he was like, did I say Big Lebowski or did I say Joe Biden? Joe Biden was not there. I looked at Big Lebowski, and he was like, sorry. And then Big Red grabbed my wig hair and started sniffing that. And he was like, this is an interesting head of hair you got, little lady. And I was like, oh. And then Big Lebowski said, hey, shouldn't we be going now? And he was like, Big Red said, you don't tell me when we go places. I tell you when you go places. He's not Southern. You don't tell me when to go places. I tell you, Buster Brown. And he got out his handgun again and went, cocked it and pointed at Big Lebowski like this. And I was like, boys, this is we don't need to do all this. Let's behave ourselves now. And Big Lebowski said, so Taylor was kind enough to say that she'll watch the bar while we're gone with her entourage. And he was like, great. And then he leaned in close to me again and was like, you should try out the toilet. I made it myself. He's not Southern. Maybe he should just be Southern. He said, you should try out the toilet. I made it myself. So I was like, all right. I may have to. I don't know. We'll see. And then Big Red said, let's go. And they all funneled out the back, into a bunch of black cars. So I looked over at the entourage guys, and they were radioed in, because some of them were cops, so they were like, they're on the move, let's tail them. So I was like, can I come? And they said, yeah, sure, get in the back. And so we drove down we waited a little bit for them to pull out. And we were in the limo. So I was like, how are you guys going to, this is kind of a conspicuous vehicle. How are you guys going to sort of do this. And he was like, we're the professionals here. Why don't you just relax? The driver said that to me. So I was like, okay, all right. I mean, you know, fine. So we start tailing them, driving a few, which I've done many times to a lot of people. I think it's fun to follow people, you know, so it's very easy too, because nobody thinks they're being followed. So if you, as long as you just don't let them know, you know, and you stay far enough back, you know. So we were driving in the limo and they were heading, you know, they got on the 110. And I was like, oh, geez, hope we're not going to get stuck in traffic. Where the hell are they going? We don't even know where they're going. Then they got on the 710. So I was like, guys, if they're going down to Long Beach, we cannot do this. Turn around and take me home. I don't want to do this anymore. And they were like, just shush. They keep driving down the 710. And I was like, they're going to Long Beach, aren't they? Long Beach is like an hour and a half away in no traffic. So I was like, God almighty. And all my Taylor Swift get up is starting to get very, you know, uncomfortable. Luckily, there's not a lot of traffic. So I starting some conversation with the driver, you know. And I say, so have you been driving limos for very long? And he said, yeah. So I said, all right. That was really all I had in me for that conversation. So finally, we get to Long Beach. We get to the port. And if you're not familiar with Los Angeles, Long Beach is sort of one of the biggest ports in the world, actually. You know, and so it receives a lot of ships, a lot of cargo, and it exports a lot of cargo. And there's just constantly boats, big boats, cargo boats. So it's like, well, it makes sense if they're doing a drug deal down here, I guess. So the limo driver is still tailing the guys from kind of far back away, and they started going into the docks, and they started weaving around these big, you know, we're off road now, and we're weaving in through, you know, the whatever you call them, the boxes. What are the big boxes? Cargo ships, you know, the big boxes that are on the cargo ships that are stacked at the port. And I can tell the limo drivers, you know, I mean, because these are tight turns that we're trying to make. So all of a sudden he tries to turn left and follow them, and I just hear a chunk, and the limo stops abruptly. And then he's like, "Fucking shit!" And he goes in reverse and tries to push the reverse, and it just goes ring, ring. That's the car sound. So he's like, "Fuck!" And he puts it in drive again and goes. That's the sound of this burning rubber, you know. And I was like, dude, shut the fuck up. You understand that we're tailing mafia members, right? And you're making probably the loudest noise in this entire port. So he radios in to somebody, and he's like, I'm stuck. And the guy on the radio goes, again? And he's like, yeah. And he said, Jesus Christ, pal! So the limo driver starts crying. That was the whole thing. So I was like, listen, you forget it. And I got out of the limo, and I just started walking down towards where the cars had been going. You know, and I had the walkie-talkie. I had a walkie-talkie. So I was like, I'm continuing on foot. I'm going to try to see what's going on. You know, so I'm sort of ducking behind the cargo. What are those things called? It's bothering me that I can't remember what they're called. Cargo containers. I'm ducking behind the cargo containers. What? All right, fine. I guess I just can't remember it. I guess I'm just going to have to do the whole fucking story not knowing the name for these things, even though the whole story is based around what they are. I'm hiding behind one of the vessels, you know, the cargo holds, the containers. You know, and I sort of peeking my little head up. And I see Monsieur, and I see Pierre standing there at the docks. And they're surrounded by a bunch of guys that are in, like, mime outfits. They got striped shirts, and they got the white painted face with the cheeks like this. And they got berets on, and they got a little red thing all around their neck. And they're also carrying machine guns. So I guess that's the LeFaux. Jesus Christ almighty, I thought that was Big Red. Oh man, I thought I was a goner. Frito-Lay chips. You think if that truck had hit me, I would have got free chips for life? Because it was on video. Something to think about. So, Big Red, or Pierre, the LeFaux dynasty is there with the mime minions. Or not the minions, well, yes, minions, but not the, like, pineapple. Or what do the minions say? Banana! Pineapple was what I said. In a few videos ago. Which nobody remembers anymore anyway. So they're waiting around. And I see Pierre ask Monsieur, like, is this guy going to show up soon? I mean, we won't have him all night. And he was like, Sacre, blah, 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 blah. Monsieur, whatever he said, I don't know. Then, car pulls around. Big Red gets out with his other bald cronies. And they walk up towards the LeFaux, and they sort of stand across from them, so they're both facing each other. And Monsieur LeFaux says, or Pierre says, because I guess Monsieur doesn't speak English very well, so Pierre's sort of the liaison, And Pierre says, well, I thought we were going to have to wait all night. I'm freezing here. And Big Red says, well, the French are very good at waiting, aren't they? Because he waited for, all the Allied forces to get involved in World War II before he decided to do anything. I don't know enough history to make a joke like that. But if you know history, can you suggest a little funny reply that Big Red could have said to that? That's like a play on words, a funny reference about the French waiting a long time for something. Does that make sense? So it would be like, Pierre would say, we had to wait all night out here. I thought we were gonna have to wait all night. And then Big Red would reply, well, you guys are very good at that because you waited, for the baguette famine of 1912 or something, something like that. Let me know in the comments. And then Eddie, maybe we can go in with the AI that you were showing me the other day and just add that to my voice there. So then Big Red says, well, you got the stuff? And he says, yep. Goes back to the cargo hold. And I'm like, what the hell is going to be in this cargo hold? What's the name for the thing? The cargo ship? The goes over to it. Container. The thing. And he starts to unlock the door. So I go on the radio and I say, he's unlocking a cargo thing. By the way, do you know what the name for that is? And I don't get any response on the radio. So I'm like, fine. They open the cargo thing. And, sorry, my stomach is grumbling. I don't know if you heard that. They open the cargo thing. And inside is another smaller cargo thing. So I'm like, geez, what the hell's in this? Like a Russian nesting doll of cargo things. So then they open the second smaller cargo thing. And I'm like, oh my gosh, what's going to be in this cargo thing? Another cargo thing that's smaller, even smaller. The third one. So it's 1, 2, 3. So then I'm like, man, this is really thorough. I didn't even know you could do this. I didn't know that this technology existed, They go in and they open the third cargo thing. So I'm like, surely this is going to be the actual thing. Nope. A fourth cargo thing. That's even smaller. So I was like, they're running out of space. What the hell is going to be in this smaller cargo thing? They open the fourth smaller cargo thing. And it is, I don't think it's technically a cargo thing, but it looks like a cargo thing because it's like a little thing about this big. And he pulls it out, and carries it over to the other, the Reddies. And Big Red's like, holy moly. And he starts going to touch it. And Monsieur's like, no! And he slaps his hand away like this. And the Reddies point their guns at the Monsieur. And the mime point their guns at the other Reddies. And Pierre's like, hey, whoa, hey, calm down. And Big Red says, so is this legit? Is this genuine? And Monsieur's like, yep. This is one of the only remaining model cargo things that were designed when they were first making cargo things, when they first invented them. This was the very first mock-up that the inventor of the cargo thing made. And he said, Big Red says, so how much you want for it? And Monsieur said, well, we discussed this on the phone. 10 billion. And Big Red laughs and was like, you're out of your mind, Frenchie, French fry. And Monsieur said, well, guess there's no deal then. So he takes the small cargo thing and he goes back over to the other layers of 4 cargo things or whatever. He starts putting it in the fourth smallest one, and then he locks the 4th one, and then he steps back and locks the 3rd one in. Then he steps back again and he locks the 2nd one in again. And then he steps all the way out and he locks the big final one. He's just about to shut the door on the big final one. And then Big Red's like, wait! So Monsieur is like... And Pierre's like, are you going to make us open all those cargo things again? And Big Red says, I'll tell you what I can do. Maybe we can do a little trade. And Pierre is like, for what? Big Red says, the boy. And Monsieur's like, you can get him to us? Big Red's like, yeah. I was like, who's the boy? And then Pierre goes like, Dad, I thought we agreed we weren't going to do this. Dan is off limits. And I realized you're talking about me! So I was like, and then Monsieur says, sometimes when you play dirty games, you play with your... he said something like that. Something that was like, sometimes you got to get your hands dirty. And Monsieur said, so is this going to be a deal breaker for you? He had a French accent, is what that was supposed to be. Pierre's like... Because I guess his hands are tied. So some friend he is. So Monsieur says, all right. It's a deal. They shake on it. And he finally closes the 4th major cargo thing. So I get very, very scared. And I sort of am just panicking. So I start sprinting and running down the road. And, I'm wearing it's hot, what do they call it? The cloppers, high heels. So they're like clop, 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 clop. And they're like, who's that? Running down the road. And it was like, and Big Red's like, oh, it's probably just somebody they brought in who escaped one of the cargo things. That was pretty dark a joke. I apologize. So to be continued.